The morning of December 24, 1943, brought a crisp chill across Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Artillery officers gathered in clusters, their breath visible in the cold air, exchanging nervous glances as they prepared to witness what many of them believed would be a catastrophic failure. Two infantry section engineers, named Edward Kroger and William Musser, stood ready to fire a 57mm cannon, unlike anything that followed conventional artillery design. This weapon vented its explosive blast backwards through the crew instead of forward, a concept that violated decades of established military practice. The artillery observer shook his head, watching the two men prepare their equipment. "You're going to kill yourselves," he called out, his voice carrying genuine concern. The engineers barely acknowledged him. They'd heard this warning 100 times over the past months. They pulled the trigger anyway. What happened next defied every expectation in the observation bunker. The weapon produced no recoil whatsoever, none at all. The shell screamed downrange for 450 yards and struck its target with precision that matched any conventional cannon. But the real astonishment came from what didn't occur. No shattered shoulders from brutal kickback, no crew members knocked senseless by the blast, no weapon leaping off its mount. The implications hung heavy in the air. American paratroopers had been dying across Italy and the Pacific because they couldn't carry real firepower into battle. The bazooka had promised so much just 2 years earlier, but its limitations had become brutally apparent. Unguided rockets lost accuracy beyond 150 yards, which meant German machine gunners positioned safely at 300 to 400 yards could cut down advancing American infantry with devastating efficiency, like hunters picking targets in a gallery. The army desperately needed something different, something portable yet powerful. What soldiers required was pocket artillery, weapons light enough for 2 men to carry but capable of hitting targets with cannon-like destruction. The artillery section had already poured millions into developing a massive 105mm cannon based on captured German designs. That approach represented proven technology, established engineering principles, proven safety records. Then 2 engineers working on their own time, pursuing what their superiors dismissed as freelance research, demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous-sounding idea was exactly what desperate circumstances demanded. The morning air carried that familiar scent of cordite and heated metal, but something felt distinctly different on this particular December day. Artillery officers huddled in their observation bunker, field glasses trained on 2 men who appeared utterly determined to commit professional suicide. Edward Kroger knelt behind what appeared to be a conventional 57mm cannon, except for one critical detail: a perforated metal cylinder attached to the breech, a component that would send explosive gases backward instead of forward. William Musser made final adjustments to the weapon they designated the T-15, though most ordnance experts preferred referring to it by a nickname composed from their surnames, something that sounded more like a medical diagnosis than a revolutionary breakthrough. Colonel James Harrison, Aberdeen's chief artillery evaluator, muttered his skepticism to nearby officers. "These infantry engineers are about to learn why we don't reinvent artillery." He'd witnessed enough promising weapons programs end in disaster over 30 years of service. This contraption violated everything he'd learned about cannon design, every principle that separated safe weapons from dangerous experiments. The British concept they were attempting struck him as elaborate engineering suicide. By venting explosive gases backwards through hundreds of tiny holes in specially designed cartridge cases, they were fighting against the accumulated wisdom of generations. Kroger felt the weight of institutional doubt pressing down like a physical force, yet the numbers in his field notebook told a completely different story. American paratroopers were dying in Italy, dying in the Pacific, because they lacked effective artillery they could carry into combat. The bazooka, celebrated as revolutionary just 2 years earlier, had revealed fatal inadequacies. Its unguided rockets lost accuracy beyond 150 yards. German machine gun positions routinely set up at 300 to 400 yards, safely beyond American infantry weapons range. Mortar crews could lob shells that distance, but mortars required indirect fire with forward observers and 20 to 30 minutes for coordination, rendering them useless for the immediate precise fire support that paratroopers desperately needed when they landed behind enemy lines. During the Sicily campaign in July, entire companies of the 82nd Airborne had been pinned down for hours by single German machine gunners positioned just beyond bazooka range. When paratroopers called for artillery support, what they received were massive bombardments that took half an hour to arrange and announced American positions to every enemy unit for miles around. By the time shells arrived, German crews had either disappeared or dug in deeper. Paratroopers needed something revolutionary, something portable, something they could operate like a rifle and fire with precision at targets currently beyond their reach. The artillery section had their solution already funded and in development. The T-15 represented a massive 105mm recoilless rifle based on captured German designs, employing proven blowout plug technology. When fired, plugs positioned at the weapon's rear would rupture in controlled fashion, venting gases backwards to eliminate recoil. German engineers had already solved the technical problems. American contractors simply needed to copy their work and accelerate production. The T-15 would devastate enemy positions, assuming someone could transport a weapon weighing over 200 pounds that required a dedicated crew of 4 men. But Kroger and Musser had pursued a different approach during their spare hours, perfecting a British concept originally developed by designer Dennis Turier. Their cartridge cases featured exactly 400 tiny holes drilled through sidewalls, then lined with plastic to prevent gas leakage before firing. When propellant exploded, pressure would rupture the plastic lining simultaneously, venting most of the blast backwards through these holes while still generating enough forward pressure to send the shell at 1,200 feet per second, 4 times faster than a bazooka rocket. The concept sounded suicidal to anyone with artillery knowledge. Conventional wisdom held that venting explosive gases near the crew proved equally dangerous to friendlies as to enemies. One Aberdeen report stated bluntly that the backblast danger zone extended 50 feet behind the weapon, meaning crews would need to clear substantial areas before firing, hardly practical for infantry engaged in close combat. Most ordnance experts predicted either insufficient muzzle velocity or the weapon turning its own destructive force against the crew. Musser double-checked the shell's pre-engraved driving bands one final time. These copper bands, machined to exact specifications, would grip the rifle barrel's grooves, spinning the projectile for accuracy while reducing friction that normally created recoil. Every component required perfect function. There were no second chances when experimenting with controlled explosions near human beings. The high-explosive shell weighed 5.3 pounds and carried enough destructive power to demolish a concrete bunker, assuming it reached the target with cannon-level precision. "Fire when ready," Kroger called out, his voice steady despite knowing that hundreds of careers depended on the next few seconds. If the T-15 worked, it would fundamentally change how infantry fought. If it failed catastrophically, 2 promising engineers faced court-martial proceedings, assuming survival. The trigger squeeze felt like any other artillery piece, smooth and deliberate and inevitable. The explosion that followed defied every artillery officer's understanding of physics. Instead of the bone-jarring recoil accompanying conventional 57mm cannon fire, the weapon remained perfectly stable. Gas pressure vented backwards through 400 precisely drilled holes, with a sound resembling controlled steam explosion while the shell screamed downrange at 1,200 feet per second. 450 yards away, the target bunker disintegrated in a cloud of concrete dust and twisted metal. Direct hit, perfect accuracy. Zero recoil. Colonel Harrison lowered his field glasses and stared at the T-15 in stunned silence. The weapon had delivered artillery-level destruction with the portability and precision that paratroopers desperately required. At 44 pounds, it weighed less than a single bazooka rocket crate, yet could engage targets at 3 times the bazooka's effective range with devastating accuracy. The implications were staggering. Infantry units could finally carry weapons matching their tactical requirements instead of accepting limitations imposed by conventional wisdom. But as smoke cleared from the test range, everyone present recognized that proving a concept worked was merely the beginning. Converting a successful prototype into a combat weapon meant overcoming institutional resistance running deeper than technical skepticism. The artillery section had millions invested in their German-inspired solution. Admitting that two infantry engineers had found a superior approach would require bureaucratic humility rarely found in wartime procurement decisions. Kroger and Musser began collecting their equipment, understanding that the genuine battle was just commencing. By November 1943, the T-15 had survived enough preliminary testing to earn official scrutiny, arriving in the form of a direct comparison determining which recoilless rifle program received full production funding. The artillery section's T-19, their 105mm behemoth based on German technology, rolled onto Aberdeen's main testing range with the confidence of proven engineering. Behind it, a crew maneuvered the T-15 into position like David approaching Goliath, except this David carried a weapon most observers still considered an elaborate method of professional suicide. Colonel Harrison supervised the tests with methodical precision, befitting a man whose recommendations would determine how American infantry fought for the war's remainder. The T-19 represented everything the artillery section valued: incremental improvement of proven German technology, substantial funding from established defense contractors, and a design philosophy prioritizing safety over portability. At 214 pounds, it required a four-man crew and specialized transport, but it delivered devastating firepower using blowout plug technology already perfected by German engineers in actual combat. The first test measured raw destructive capability. The T-19's 105mm high-explosive shell obliterated its target bunker with satisfying finality, creating a crater large enough to swallow a small automobile. Observers nodded approvingly. This was overwhelming firepower that won battles decisively. When the T-15's turn arrived, its 57mm shell seemed almost delicate by comparison. Yet the target bunker disappeared just as completely, reduced to scattered concrete fragments and twisted reinforcing steel. Adequate destruction, Harrison noted on his evaluation sheet, though privately he wondered whether adequate sufficed when American lives depended on stopping German strongpoints with single shots. The T-15's smaller warhead carried 250 grams of explosive compared to the T-19's massive payload, but both weapons had accomplished the mission objective of eliminating the bunker. The fundamental question wasn't about destructive power. It was about what infantry units actually needed: maximum firepower in a compact package or a heavier weapon with greater range. When accuracy testing began, something remarkable emerged. The Croker and Mauser's approach produced the first clear advantage that would shift everything. The T-15's rifled barrel, with its pre-engraved driving bands, consistently grouped shots in tight 3-inch patterns at 400 yards. This performance matched what dedicated anti-tank guns could achieve. The T-19's smooth bore and blowout plug system worked acceptably for spreading fire across wider areas, but it lacked the precision needed for hitting specific windows, gun ports, or soldiers positioned in fortified locations. Paratroopers fighting in tight spaces desperately needed accurate strikes, not widespread bombardment. Yet when comparing portability, the divide between traditional artillery thinking and innovative infantry approaches became undeniable. The T-19 demanded its full crew plus a specialized wheeled carriage. Getting it to battle quickly across broken ground or into contested landing zones proved nearly impossible. From the moment crews arrived until they fired their first shot took roughly 12 minutes on average, and that assumed they found flat terrain with established clear fields of fire already prepared. The T-15 told a completely different story. 2 men could carry it. Assembly took fewer than 3 minutes. They could fire it from the shoulder, from a bipod, or from any improvised support, depending on what the situation demanded. Croker observed Harrison's face as evaluation numbers filled sheet after sheet. The arithmetic was stark. 44.4 pounds compared to 214 pounds. 3 minutes versus 12 for setup. 2 soldiers versus 4 crew members. Both weapons effective to 450 yards. 3 inches of armor penetration for the T-15 against 4 for the T-19. Ammunition weight told its own story. 5.3 pounds per T-15 shell versus 11 pounds for T-19 rounds. The mathematics of infantry combat were swinging decisively toward the smaller weapon, yet institutional momentum possessed its own mathematical weight. The turning point arrived during rapid-fire testing. Traditional artillery doctrine emphasized deliberate, carefully aimed fire with conservative ammunition use. But real infantry battles demanded something different. Troops needed immediate firepower against multiple threats using whatever weapons were physically available right then. The T-15 could engage 6 targets in the time the T-19 needed for just 2. Its lighter ammunition meant crews could carry sufficient rounds for sustained fighting without waiting for resupply. Muster had invested weeks refining the perforated cartridge case, collaborating with plastic manufacturers on linings that would rupture uniformly under explosive pressure, yet maintain integrity during storage and transport. Precisely 400 holes drilled to exact specifications, positioned according to calculations that balanced forward projectile velocity against backward gas venting. The plastic lining required sufficient thickness to prevent gas leakage while sitting in storage, yet enough flexibility to rupture completely during firing. Ensuring no partially vented cases would create unpredictable pressure variations that could injure crews. The engineering sophistication impressed even skeptical ordnance experts. But brilliant design couldn't overcome institutional resistance. Rumors started spreading about the T-15 being as threatening to its operators as to enemies. Critics emphasized back-blast hazards rather than combat potential. The 50-foot danger zone behind the weapon became their primary argument, claiming infantry units couldn't safely use recoilless rifles in tight combat, where clearing rear areas proved impossible. Training emerged as another flashpoint. The T-19's German-inspired design operated similarly to conventional artillery, requiring minimal additional crew preparation. The T-15's backblast characteristics demanded entirely new tactical procedures, different crew positioning protocols, and safety awareness exceeding traditional infantry weapons training. Risk-averse military planners saw additional training as unwanted complication that would delay deployment and raise the chances of errors when soldiers faced combat stress. However, reports arriving from Italian battlefields began changing tactical thinking in ways bureaucratic objections couldn't suppress. September's landings at Salerno had demonstrated precisely why paratroopers required portable artillery support. German defenders had arranged machine gun positions and anti-tank weapons at distances that made American bazookas ineffective while remaining beyond accurate mortar range without forward observers. Battalion after battalion got trapped for hours by defensive weapons that swift, accurate direct fire could have eliminated quickly. Division commanders started demanding immediate deployment of any recoilless rifle, offering infantry the firepower edge they desperately needed. The T-19's superior destructive potential mattered little if it couldn't arrive in time to influence battles. Airborne forces especially required weapons portable enough to drop with assault troops, ready for immediate use without heavy equipment or specialized personnel. Manufacturing added its own complications. The T-19 needed specialized factories and materials already committed to other artillery programs. The T-15 could use modified small arms manufacturing equipment, potentially enabling rapid expansion if combat requirements exceeded initial plans. Yet neither weapon could be produced in America. Both would need overseas manufacturing regardless. December brought unofficial reports that the T-15 would get limited production approval for field evaluation. Full deployment still depended on proving itself under actual combat conditions. By February 1945, the T-15 had become officially designated the M18, though the weapon remained largely theoretical rather than present in actual combat units. Production calls demanded 2,000 weapons and 800,000 ammunition rounds in 4 different types. American factories remained completely committed to existing work, consuming every available slot. An unexpected answer emerged. Dominion Arsenal in Quebec, Canada, possessed extra capacity and specific expertise in precision munitions. Canadian engineers examined the perforated cartridge specifications with meticulous care that such precision demanded. Even tiny differences in hole diameter or plastic lining thickness could transform a precision instrument into a crew killer. Major General William Bud Maley learned about the M18's existence in early March while organizing Operation Varsity, the war's largest single-day airborne assault. His 17th Airborne Division had paid brutal prices during the Battle of the Bulge, where his soldiers fought as ground troops rather than conducting their planned combat jump. The approaching Rhine crossing offered their first real chance to demonstrate that airborne forces could seize critical objectives deep behind enemy lines. German forces had transformed the approaches to Wesel into nightmarish fortifications, concrete bunkers, interconnected machine gun positions, anti-tank emplacements, all positioned to neutralize conventional infantry weapons beyond safe distances. The tactical situation was becoming grimly complex as intelligence revealed the scope of German defensive preparation. Reinforced concrete bunkers with steel-lined firing ports commanded every path toward landing zones. Machine gun nests possessed overlapping fields of fire designed to slaughter paratroopers before they could mount effective resistance. Textbook doctrine called for overwhelming artillery bombardment followed by armor, but airborne troops would fight alone for at least 6 hours before ground forces could reach them. Those 6 hours would decide everything. Mealy's operations officer laid aerial photographs across the briefing table, each one displaying fresh defensive positions seemingly designed to stop paratroopers. German engineers had absorbed lessons from previous Allied operations, positioning strength at ranges exceeding bazooka effectiveness while staying beyond accurate mortar reach. The 200-yard gap separating American weapon range from German fortifications had become a slaughter zone where entire companies could perish trying to close the distance. "We need something that can reach out and touch these bunkers from 400 yards, Mealy told his staff, aware that conventional solutions simply didn't exist. Heavy weapon companies possessed mortars and machine guns, but mortars required indirect fire with forward observers who'd likely become early casualties in contested landings. The new M18 promised artillery-level destructive power in a package 2 paratroopers could manage. Though Mealy had witnessed enough experimental weapons disappoint under actual battle conditions to trust theory without proven results. The first 50 M18s left Canadian factories March 10th, barely 14 days before Operation Varsity's launch. Individual crates contained weapons alongside ammunition, revealing operational flexibility. M307 heat rounds carried shaped charges penetrating 3 inches of armor or concrete. M306 high-explosive rounds delivered devastating bunker destruction. M308 white phosphorus rounds could clear trenches and forest areas, using chemical fire forcing defenders from positions. Each ammunition type demanded different tactical choices, requiring crews master target recognition and engagement techniques. Staff Sergeant Mike Chen had endured Sicily, Italy, and the Bulge by maintaining healthy skepticism toward untested equipment. Yet M18 specifications intrigued him despite reservations. At 44.4 pounds, the weapon weighed considerably less than a water-cooled machine gun, yet promised firepower eliminating targets previously requiring artillery. The ammunition itself concerned him more than the weapon. 5.3-pound shells contained explosives sufficient for demolishing structures, yet created 50-foot back blast zones behind firing positions. Training started immediately with weapons still coated in factory cosmoline, using instruction manuals written by engineers who'd never actually fired these weapons in combat. Chen's squad drilled assembly until they could field strip and reassemble the M18 in under 3 minutes. Theory felt insufficient for upcoming combat jumps into fortified terrain. 3 firing positions offered options: shoulder-fired for mobility, bipod-mounted for accuracy, tripod-mounted for stability. The tripod configuration proved most useful for bunker missions dominating varsity planning. Mounted on modified M1917 water-cooled Browning tripods, the M18 delivered rifle precision fire at maximum range. However, tripod mounting added 52 additional pounds, meaning each M18 team carried over 100 pounds of equipment, plus personal weapons and gear. Chen obsessively calculated ammunition requirements. Standard issue prescribed 12 rounds per weapon, 4 shells per 40-pound wooden crate, though actual combat experience suggested sustained engagements would consume rounds faster than peacetime planners anticipated. Ammunition variety created tactical complications different from traditional weapons. Heat rounds targeted bunkers and fortifications, but wasted power against exposed soldiers. High explosive rounds maximized fragmentation against troops in open areas, but lacked penetration against concrete. White phosphorus could force defenders abandoning positions, yet created lingering chemical hazards, threatening friendlies if wind shifted. Target recognition became essential as crews learned matching ammunition types to situations. German positions ranged from reinforced concrete bunkers demanding heat rounds to machine nests and wood structures high explosive rounds could obliterate. Misidentification meant either wasting precious ammunition or failing achieving necessary destruction. Battles allowed no leisurely target study, requiring crews develop instinctive ammunition selection against specific positions. Backblast danger created additional complications. Training could reduce but never eliminate. 50 feet of clear space meant crews couldn't fire from covered positions, offering protection from enemy observation and counterfire. Open firing positions exposed M18 teams to sniper shots and artillery, but covered position firing would injure or kill operators from explosive gases. Chen's squad practiced rapid movement drills, knowing first shots revealed positions requiring immediate relocation before concentrated enemy response. March 23rd arrived with weather-threatening Operation Varsity cancellation. Allied commanders nevertheless decided further delays gave German defenders time strengthening positions. 17,000 paratroopers would jump into heavily defended zones, carrying experimental weapons never battlefield-tested. Staking lives on engineering calculations, promising infantry portable artillery firepower, previously impossible. March 24, 1945, dawned showing the Rhine Valley shrouded in morning mist that would either conceal history's largest single-day airborne operation or transform 17,000 paratroopers into victims of a killing field specifically designed defeating their methods. British ground forces had pushed across the river under the protective cover of darkness near the vessel, clawing out fragile positions on the eastern bank, while German artillery pounded their locations with relentless, methodical ferocity. By mid-morning, 1,500 Allied transport aircraft would carry the 17th and 6th Airborne Divisions into brutally fortified terrain, where reinforced concrete bunkers and machine gun emplacements lay waiting. Carefully surveyed, registered, and prepared for precisely this scenario. Staff Sergeant Chen ran his hand over his M18 one last time. As his C-46 droned steadily eastward across Allied lines, the weapon's unfamiliar weight pressed down alongside equipment loads that already tested his endurance. The 12 shells packed into 3 ammunition bags represented firepower his squad had never wielded before, but also carried responsibility that kept him restless throughout the 2-hour flight toward the target zone. Each heat round possessed the power to shatter a concrete bunker, yet only if his crew could position the weapon, identify targets correctly, and fire before German defenders could concentrate their return fire on their exposed location. The terrain stretched below like a dark patchwork quilt, interrupted by open fields marked for drop zones X, Y, and Z. Intelligence photographs had painted a grim picture of what awaited the airborne troops. Machine gun positions arranged to create crossfire across every landing area, mortar placements locked onto suspected assembly points, and concrete bunkers positioned to command every conceivable approach. German defenders had studied Allied airborne tactics over 3 years, absorbing lessons from Sicily, Normandy, and Market Garden to construct defensive systems specifically engineered to devastate paratroopers before they could mount organized resistance. 10 o'clock arrived with the sky erupting in black smoke puffs as German flak burst around the formation, each explosion a desperate attempt to bring down the transports before they released their human cargo. Chen felt his C-46 shudder as shrapnel tore through the fuselage, but the pilot held course toward Drop Zone X with the grim resolve of aircrew who measured their success by how many paratroopers survived the jump, not by how many planes returned home. The jump itself felt routine despite everything surrounding it. 20 seconds of controlled descent followed by the sudden shock of the parachute opening, and that familiar weightless sensation of drifting toward Earth while completely exposed to enemy fire. But routine evaporated the instant Chen's boots touched German soil. Automatic weapons fire erupted from concealed positions intelligence had somehow missed, raking the drop zone with withering crossfire. Machine gun tracers carved deadly patterns of red light that scythed through paratroopers still tangled in their chutes, while mortar rounds began falling with the precision that months of defensive preparation had perfected. Chen's squad scattered toward a drainage ditch that offered concealment from view, but absolutely no shelter from plunging fire. Around them, other 17th Airborne units fought desperately to establish any kind of organized defense while pinned down by fire from positions they couldn't see and couldn't touch. Standard infantry weapons could spot muzzle flashes, but lacked the range and accuracy needed to eliminate fortified positions designed to survive conventional assault. The first M18 opportunity came when a concrete bunker began systematically sweeping the drop zone with machine gun fire, each burst cutting through paratroopers who were sprinting towards assembly points. Chen estimated the distance at 400 yards, well beyond bazooka range, but ideal for the untested weapon he carried. His assistant gunner, Private Rodriguez, had already positioned the M1917 tripod with movements honed through weeks of relentless training. Understanding that how quickly they got set up would determine whether they could engage targets before German observers called counterfire down on their heads. Loading the first heat round demanded absolute precision, despite the chaos erupting around them. The M307 shell weighed 5.3 pounds and carried a shaped charge engineered to punch through 3 inches of reinforced concrete, but only if fired accurately from a stable platform with proper range estimation. Chen centered his sights on the bunker's firing port, fully aware that missing meant wasting irreplaceable ammunition, while his fellow paratroopers kept dying beneath machine gun fire they couldn't suppress. The trigger squeeze felt identical to countless practice rounds, yet the consequences were entirely different. The M18's muzzle blast produced a distinctive crack that announced precision firepower to everyone in earshot, while superheated gases venting through 400 perforated holes created that characteristic controlled steam explosion sound. 50 feet behind their position, the back blast scorched vegetation and filled the air with heat that would have incinerated anyone caught in that danger zone. 400 yards distant, the heat round struck the bunker's firing port with precision and detonated inside the concrete structure. The shaped charge's copper liner formed a molten jet that punched through 3 inches of reinforced concrete as easily as plywood, then expanded inside the bunker to create devastating overpressure that killed every machine gun crew member instantly. Secondary explosions followed as stored ammunition ignited, transforming a deadly strongpoint into a smoking ruin that no longer threatened paratroopers organizing their defense. Chen watched through his sights as the bunker disintegrated, scarcely believing that a weapon he could carry had just delivered destruction that previously required divisional artillery. But there was no moment for wonder. German defenders were already adjusting their fire toward the M18 position, and muzzle flashes from other concealed locations indicated additional targets demanding immediate attention. Rodriguez had already loaded a second heat round, knowing that their position was now compromised, and they would need to eliminate multiple threats quickly or relocate before concentrated retaliation found them. The second target was a machine gun nest inside a reinforced farmhouse 350 yards to the north, its position betrayed by tracers decimating paratroopers attempting to cross open ground. Chen adjusted his aim and fired again, watching the heat round punch through the building's stone walls and detonate with devastating internal effect. Machine gun fire ceased instantly, replaced by secondary explosions indicating substantial ammunition stocks stored within. Within 15 minutes, Chen's squad had neutralized 4 separate German positions that had been pinning down entire companies of paratroopers. Each engagement demonstrated capabilities that no standard infantry weapon possessed. Artillery-class destruction delivered with rifle-like precision by a 2-man crew using portable equipment. German defenders began abandoning positions that had been engaged by M18 fire, understanding that concrete bunkers, once thought impregnable to conventional infantry, offered no protection against shaped charges designed to penetrate any fortification. Other M18 teams across the drop zone achieved comparable results, systematically destroying strongpoints positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. The tactical advantage was shifting in ways German defensive planners had never contemplated. As weapons they had never encountered, began annihilating positions that had consumed months to construct and fortify. For the first time in airborne operations, infantry units possessed immediate fire support, capable of neutralizing prepared defenses without requesting artillery strikes, requiring 30 minutes to coordinate and announcing friendly positions to every enemy observer for miles around. By noon, the 17th Airborne Division had secured objectives that planners had estimated would require 6 hours of intense combat. By 1800 hours, on March 24th, the division had achieved objectives operational planners had allocated 2 full days to accomplish, though the price was measured in casualties reflecting airborne warfare's brutal reality. 1,300 American paratroopers lay killed or wounded following Operation Varsity, yet they had captured over 2,000 German prisoners and eliminated defensive positions that could have stalled the Rhine crossing for weeks. The M18 had performed under the most demanding combat imaginable, though its future would be determined by tactical reports assessing whether Kroger and Musser's controversial innovation could transition from experimental weapon to standard infantry equipment. Major General Miley walked through positions his paratroopers had seized, using firepower previous airborne operations had never possessed, examining concrete bunkers showing distinctive penetration patterns from heat rounds fired at precise ranges. Each destroyed strongpoint represented enemy resistance that would have demanded sustained company-level assaults using conventional weapons. Yet M18 crews had eliminated them with single accurately placed shots that left no question about the weapon's devastating effectiveness against fortified positions. Staff Sergeant Chen's after-action report documented 12 separate engagements where his M18 destroyed targets beyond effective infantry range. Bunkers at 400 yards, concrete fortifications with steel-reinforced firing ports, anti-tank gun positions sighted to dominate approach routes, all eliminated with shaped charges penetrating defenses as though they were constructed from cardboard instead of reinforced concrete. The weapon's rifled barrel had delivered accuracy, matching dedicated anti-tank guns, while its portability allowed rapid repositioning between firing locations. The tactical revolution became evident from German prisoners describing their shock at watching bunkers requiring weeks to construct vanish under single hits from weapons they had never encountered. German defensive doctrine had rested on the assumption that American infantry lacked firepower to eliminate concrete fortifications without massive artillery preparation that revealed attack timing and directions. The M18 rendered those assumptions obsolete by giving two-man teams the capability to destroy any defensive position they could see and accurately range. Combat reports from other M18 crews confirmed the weapon's versatility across various tactical situations. High explosive rounds proved devastatingly effective against personnel in the open, delivering fragmentation that cleared trenches and defensive positions with single shots. White phosphorus rounds forced German defenders from covered positions where they became vulnerable to small arms fire, while the chemical burning effect denied terrain to enemy forces attempting to establish new defensive lines. Yet the weapon's most significant impact was psychological rather than purely destructive. German commanders had positioned defensive systems based on detailed understanding of American infantry capabilities, creating killing fields at ranges where bazookas were useless and mortar fire required forward observers who would be among the first casualties. The sudden appearance of weapons accurately engaging targets at 450 yards disrupted defensive calculations months of preparation had perfected. Intelligence reports began documenting German tactical changes, reflecting growing awareness of American firepower capabilities they had never faced. Defensive positions were abandoned when M18 fire appeared, even if initial shots missed their targets. German machine gun crews avoided positions offering excellent fields of fire, but exposing them to direct fire from ranges they had considered safe. The psychological effect of watching concrete bunkers disintegrate under single hits forced tactical modifications, reducing German defensive effectiveness across entire sectors. The weapon's combat debut also revealed limitations training had failed to identify. Ammunition consumption exceeded peacetime projections when crews engaged multiple targets in rapid succession, and resupply became critical during sustained engagements. The 50-foot back blast danger zone forced tactical compromises, exposing crews to enemy observation and return fire. though German counter-battery capabilities proved less effective than anticipated. Most critically, the weapon's effectiveness depended entirely on crew training and target identification skills requiring experience levels new replacement personnel might not possess. Production reports from Dominion Arsenal in Quebec indicated manufacturing could scale to meet increased demand, but delivery timelines remained constrained by shipping capacity and quality control requirements. Each M18 required precision manufacturing that could not be accelerated without compromising tolerances, making the perforated cartridge case system function reliably. Canadian engineers had mastered production techniques, but expanding manufacturing to American facilities would require months of tooling and training combat units could not afford. By June 9, 1945, M18s had reached Pacific Theater units fighting on Okinawa, where Japanese defensive tactics created problems perfectly suited to the weapon's capabilities. Japanese fortifications carved into coral and concrete had proven nearly impervious to conventional infantry weapons, requiring massive artillery preparation that alerted defenders and often failed eliminating hidden positions. M18 precision and portability allowed infantry units eliminating specific bunkers and cave positions, with surgical strikes preserving surprise. Okinawa combat reports confirmed the weapon's effectiveness against fortified positions exceeded even optimistic development projections. Japanese positions withstanding sustained 155mm artillery bombardment were being eliminated by single heat rounds fired by two-man crews approaching targets under cover and engaging from concealed positions. The tactical flexibility was revolutionary. Infantry units no longer needed requesting artillery support, revealing their positions and timing to enemy observers. Korean War authorization tables reflected the M18's transition from experimental weapon to standard equipment, with each rifle company allocated 3 weapons and appropriate ammunition loads. Designation had evolved from T-15 to M18 to M20 as manufacturing improvements and tactical modifications were incorporated, but the fundamental concept remained unchanged, giving infantry units artillery-level firepower in packages carried and employed by conventional soldiers. Edward Kroger received reports of the weapon's combat success while working on post-war development projects that seemed mundane compared to the urgent life-and-death priorities driving the M18's creation. Letters from combat veterans described how the weapon saved lives by eliminating threats requiring sustained assault by multiple infantry companies, validating engineering decisions dismissed as dangerously impractical by conventional military wisdom. Final vindication came in casualty statistics showing dramatically reduced infantry losses when units equipped with M18s compared to similar operations using conventional weapons. Soldiers initially skeptical because of backblast characteristics became the weapon's strongest advocates after experiencing its devastating effectiveness against previously untouchable targets. By war's end, over 2,000 M18s had been produced and deployed to combat units that used them primarily against fortified positions rather than tanks they originally targeted, proving innovation often finds applications exceeding creators' original vision.